Entering Cambodia was a trip in itself. A ride in a boat so tightly packed that we were literally hanging off the back rail, a couple of tuk-tuk rides along dirt roads, and a bus ride with a group of boys crowding around the window. I was prepared for the unusual. I met Liga on my first night wandering around Siem Reap. Walking alone, I passed him on his motorbike. "You want to ride on my moto?" I wasn't interested in a ride and said no thanks and started to walk on.
He pleaded after me, "Please buy a ride. I got buy rice for wife and baby."
It was a plea hard to avoid, so I got on the bike and said, "Give me $1 worth of ride." At that time, $1 was like a day's pay in Cambodia. I think today it's gone up to about $2. He took me off through the streets of Siem Reap. As we were riding, he turned back and said, "You want to see my house?" Well, I was traveling to have interesting experiences, and so I said sure, but I had no idea what I was about to see. Liga, his wife, their daughter, his sister, her husband, and their son all lived in one room of a small complex of rooms for which they paid $25 a month. They shared 2 bathrooms and a well with all their neighbors. They bought food from a small store at the end of the row.
As Liga used to say, life is a struggle.
Liga became my regular driver. One day, he took me out to the countryside to meet his family.
His father and I watched as Liga cut his mother's toenails.
We walked through his neighborhood. Out through the fields that they shared. We walked into the local village. Hi. Is he planting a garden here? We visited with the local school teacher. And saw the local school. And how many students are there?
It's around 15 students.
Yeah. We visited the village stores. We passed a group of children swimming in a swimming hole. Had they ever seen a video camera before? We came across a palm tree being tapped by the local distiller. And he showed us some of his secrets. They mix up the rice and then they put it in here.
And then they cook it?
This is the factory for cook the rice
Right.
and steam
Steam the rice.
the rice. But
It was quite effective. After that, I arranged to have a tuk-tuk built for Liga, and for the next month or so, he showed me around the secret places of Cambodia. He couldn't take me to Angkor Wat, Cambodia's most famous tourist attraction. You needed a special government license to take tourists there. But he took me to so many other magical places. We went to the opening of a new Buddhist temple, one of many since all of the old temples had been destroyed by the Khmer Rouge. More about that later. The entrance was surrounded by beggars. Liga handed out 100 real notes, Cambodian currency, worth perhaps 2 pennies in American money. We went to the Landmines Museum, located on the far outskirts of Siem Reap, which was set up to aid some of the 40,000 amputees in Cambodia who encountered one of the 4 to 6 million landmines placed there during many years of ravaging war. Most of the victims are young boys. One can only imagine the distress such an event takes on a poor farm family in a land where there is no insurance or health care. What's your name?
Jet.
Jet? And how old are you?
15.
I see. And you stepped on a landmine?
Yeah.
Let me see that. Yeah. I went with Liga's family on a picnic to Phnom Kolen, the mountain of the great waterfall. Along the way, we had to stop and pray with a passing Buddhist monk. While there, we went to see the ruins of an ancient temple. Liga explained to me how his ancestors had used the waters to carry the massive stones to the area. The temple was in ruins, having been destroyed by the Khmer Rouge. He took me to the local market where his mother sold soup she made in her kitchen. We took the riverboat to Tonle Sap, Cambodia's largest lake. Where we had lunch in a floating restaurant where the fish was always fresh. And watched children row around in tubs collecting pennies from tourists. Liga took me to so many magical places. That it all becomes a blur. And sometimes we just stop and look at something. We saw the skeletons and skulls of the war dead in a memorial set up in a nearby temple. We were invited into the monks' dormitory. We came upon the bridegroom and his family marching toward the home of the bride. They were going to be married that day. The sign said welcome, so we went in, and we were welcomed. We took a boat trip up the Mekong River. To Phnom Penh, where we saw many things. But most memorable among them were the high school classrooms that had been turned into torture chambers. And the hundreds, thousands of human skulls memorialized there in the killing fields, reminding tourists and Cambodian alike of the horrible Cambodian Holocaust. But of all the places we visited, the one I most remember was the place that Liga called the poor school. The poor school was one of scores, perhaps hundreds of similar rural schools dotted throughout the Cambodian countryside. The buildings are sometimes hardly standing. The teachers were often barely educated themselves. There were few, if any, books, and the buildings were in total disrepair. The teachers, quite often dedicated, sometimes started these schools themselves. They taught the children in return for contributions of rice or coins from the local parents. The children were lovely, so grateful when we brought them school supplies, or perhaps oranges or crackers. Watching them take those crackers so enthusiastically reminds us of what a rare treat a cracker must be for them. Before World War II, Cambodia was an independent and proud country. One wonders now why these schools are in such disrepair, why the teachers are so underfunded, and why the children are so hungry. To answer that, you need a bit of history. Cambodia won its independence from France in 1953. At that time, Phnom Penh, a beautiful city, was known as the Pearl of the East. But in 1973, as history would have it, Pol Pot, a communist insurrectionist with an army of about 18,000, marched into Phnom Penh and took over the government. The people cheered him when he arrived. The government had been in chaos, and Cambodia would now be ruled for Cambodians. They did not know Pol Pot. Pol Pot had been born in moderate wealth. He had served in the king's court and had seen the extremes of wealth there. As a student, he went to Paris, where he became a dedicated communist. Later, driven out of Phnom Penh by political pressures, he went to live in the jungle among the native peoples, and came to believe that they had the only natural type of life, a pure communism. He believed that the only way for Cambodia to exist was to remove all vestiges of the old culture and start again with a totally agrarian society. Within 3 days, the Khmer Rouge Army, the Red Khmer, as Pol Pot named it, marched every citizen of Phnom Penh out of the city and into the country to work the fields. The old, the young, the infirm. They emptied schools and hospitals. They emptied homes and hotels. This was to be a totally agrarian society. Pol Pot declared the year zero, the beginning of a new Cambodia. But all of the old Cambodia had yet to be destroyed. Temples were destroyed. Religion was abolished. Books were burned. Reading was prohibited. Family units were broken up. Children were taken from their parents. Dissent was eliminated ruthlessly. All vestiges of the old society were to be destroyed, and so the killing started. Buddhist monks were killed. Government officials were killed. Muslims, professors, teachers, doctors, lawyers, students, the infirm and the crippled, all were to be killed. They killed children if they wore glasses because they might be intellectual. They had a proverb, to keep you is no benefit, to destroy you is no loss. Before they killed them, they tortured them till they gave the name of friends, family, and strangers, who were then taken and tortured for further names, often by having their head bashed in with an iron bar in order to save bullets. They took pictures of them before they killed them, hundreds of pictures. They killed children in front of their parents, parents in front of their children. They wanted to destroy a culture, to wipe out the educated class. They destroyed all money. They destroyed all records of ownership of land. 2.5 million people died, about 1/4 of the population. It was one of the most horrible genocides in history. The country has never recovered. One historian says it will take over 100 years to repair the damage. And as for Pol Pot, he himself grew to an old age and late in life lived to speak to the video cameras.
ខ្ញុំមុនដំបូងខ្ញុំសូមជម្រាបថា ខ្ញុំមករួមតស៊ូមិនមែនដើម្បីសម្រាប់ប្រជាជនសម្រាប់ជាតិទេឥឡូវក៏ដោយលោកមើលខ្ញុំជាមនុស្សកាចសាហាវគូឃើញឬក៏យ៉ាងណា
In 1978, Vietnam invaded Cambodia. Chaos ensued, and there followed many years of bloody war, with hundreds of thousands displaced and tens of thousands killed. Till in 1992, the United Nations stepped in, and with the help of Vietnam, USA, China, Russia, and even Cambodia, a compromise government was formed. It was so compromised that they had two prime ministers. It was doomed to failure. Hun Sen, Prime Minister number 2, overthrew Prime Minister number 1 and has ruled Cambodia with an iron hand since then. And how have Cambodians fared? Not so well. Roughly 4 million residents live on less than $1.25 a day. An estimated 37% of the country's children are malnourished. Since all records of land ownership were destroyed, many farms and much land have been confiscated. Tens of thousands of Cambodians have been displaced to make way for logging projects. Thousands of acres of pristine forest have been clear-cut, with the dispossessed being sent to far-off camps where they are out of sight. 12 families own 95% of the country's wealth. And as is usual, the land goes to the rich and from the poor. Angkor Wat, Cambodia's most important historic site, takes in $60 million a year, but only less than 10 million of that goes to the Cambodian people. The country is among the poorest in the world. On a list of countries where people suffer most, they rank third. And yet, Cambodia has a national debt of almost $18 billion. Approximately 30% of Cambodian gross national product goes to wealthy countries to pay off that debt. With all the money borrowed, one wonders, where are the roads? Where are the hospitals? Where are the schools? And that brings us back to the poor schools, to those lovely children living in the dark shadows of events that took place long before they were born. Eventually, I said goodbye to the poor school and to Cambodia. I took a bus to Thailand. It was so crowded that passengers had to carry their luggage in their laps. When they complained, the bus owner shouted back at them, "You buy ticket for person, not for suitcase." I have been on 5 Cambodian buses. 3 of them broke down. This one broke down in a desolate area far from any civilization. Luckily, within 100 yards or so, there was a shed set up next to a swimming hole to protect from the hot sun. We huddled in the shade and chatted with the Cambodian boys who were hanging out there. They reminded me of the boys pounding on the bus window on the day that I arrived. I will always remember Cambodians with fondness. In spite of their poverty, their smiles reflect deep joy and hope. Where do they find that happiness in the midst of so much poverty? Perhaps it is joy enough for them that there is no more war. From there, I went to Thailand. 100 miles geographically was 1,000,000 miles culturally. In Thailand, I saw well-dressed, well-fed people playing in the park, doing regimented exercises, protesting in the streets, or caught up in traffic jams. I went into a large high-end mall where there were all the trappings of a wealthy consumer society. Fancy cars, furniture, jewelry, all the valuables that this modern age can offer. Walking about later, I passed a large temple. I explored it. On the roof there was a set of bells. Of course I had to ring them. As they rang, I thought back to the children in the poor school, so near, but so far. I saw how the two societies were connected. The poverty there is accepted by the powers here. The payment of interest there is wealth here. The floods there are carbon pollution here. I recall that most famous line of John Donne. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Yes, I thought, but first it tolls for them.